So when we talk about technology innovation, people usually think about apps and startups, but there is a real transformation that requires human adoption to being part of this. Christian Dandenau has spent his career thinking about how technology can be used to help humans solve problems. Through his work with IDFusion, he works with communities to adopt and integrate advanced data technology to be able to support their businesses. I wanted to talk with Christian about what it would take to build a truly connected Canadian system and how we can make sure that everybody could be a part of that. My name is Emily Madden, and this is the MNL Show. Christian, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So let's dive right into it. We only have a short period of time together. So you've spent years, obviously, at the forefront of technology, and what you do in particular is helping communities and organizations adapt to new technologies. Talk to me about your origin story a little bit. What drew you to this kind of work?
I think when you start a company, you don't always know, I think you rarely ever know what, the future is going to hold. You have an idea, you have some thoughts on that. And when I started, the intent was probably to build a legacy organization, legacy company, something that would be lasting, something that I could say, would be possibly passed down to generations. Mm. And to do that, I figured it would be important to really have some core principles and purposes and values that we're going to be able to last for, a long time. So that led us down the path of solving people's problems using technology, because I really saw that was something that was consistent. It was something that was constantly around me. And so with two guys I went to university with, we decided we were going to start a tech company, but focused on using technology as the enabler to solve some real business problems and some, problems that were things that we wanted to fix and solve that weren't being addressed properly. We didn't really start with anything more than that. And so the problems that we got exposed to early were things like organizations that wanted to, improve the process of doing accounting, very simple processes, very simple problems. Mm-hmm. But shortly after that, we latched onto this idea that a lot of retailers wanted to sell their stuff online, but there was a hesitancy around using credit cards. Yeah. So this is in 99, 2000. So we decided to reshape our company into a product called My Local Store. That was an e-commerce provider that we had built as a platform for small retailers who could sell locally to to their customers or sell to the national or global market, but to be able to do it in a way that there was trust and confidence in knowing that you were buying from someone, that was known, that you had seen the physical brick and mortar store. Yeah. And the brick and mortar store felt that they were be able to alleviate some of the risk that people had, because someone could order it online but come in and pick it up in store. So that's a little bit how we started, and from there we had to evolve and adapt, and everything changes all the time.
So it's interesting because you're describing, we hear so much technology as like a disruptor, right? But you're am I picking up that you're seeing it almost like the opposite, like this is an enabler, this is some kind of a connection, as you say, to help people solve real problems in their life. Yeah. Can you talk to me? This sounds like a philosophical approach for you from the beginning. When would you say that you first started thinking about technology, not kind of as a disrupting tool, but really as something that can be helpful on a human level?
It would have been really early. When I was in university, I did my first undergrad was in physics, and realizing that I would have to continue all the way to PhD to have any prospects of a job, because you're essentially, there's only a couple spots you can work as a physicist in the world. So I said, maybe I need something more practical. I went to computer engineering.
The most practical.
Almost practical. It's adjacent, right?
Yeah.
And from that, the whole scientific method is, where I was immersed in this concept, right? And so, problem, hypothesis, solution, testing, validation, and being able to do this in your mind essentially is what physics, requires you to do, because it's very hard to test ideology. So with that, I was envisioning the problem, my customer's problem, some of my community's problems, and trying to envision the solution before it was even built, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, where I came from. And it's probably really core to me as a person. I'm always trying to provide solutions, provide help, and to do that by having more information, more knowledge, different approaches, thinking of it in a different direction.
Yeah.
Which is how our company actually has its name, IDFusion, IDFusion. It's a French play on words, and it's the combination of logic and analysis with creativity and thinking outside of the box. So the left and right hemisphere of the brain are basically how we approach everything.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, you talk about disruption. Yes, I think it does disrupt other organizations, but I mean, I also see it as evolution, right?
Yeah.
To say you're disrupting the lamplighters' employment because you've created electricity and now there's lampposts that don't require that, is it really disruption or evolution? So I'm not sure,
Your logo makes a ton of sense to me now, IDFusion, with the two sides of the brain on that. I love that. Can you tell me, your Métis, your Indigenous background, and the way that you're thinking about shared systems and a sense of community, does that play into the philosophy at all? Like, how would you kind of integrate that kind of way of thinking into your more scientific?
That came a little bit later in my business career. So when I was young, we played the fiddle. We were very much involved in some of the elements of their Métis culture, but not. It didn't really bleed into my business.
Okay.
There was a certain stereotype that being in Indigenous business was not necessarily viewed, in a positive way. Yeah. A lot of the stereotypes around Indigenous people would be, were extended into the business world. So it wasn't something you would necessarily be proud to share or, really bringing at the forefront. And that limited a lot of their conversations around that topic, and we didn't bring it up.
Yeah.
But most of my ancestry has been entrepreneurs. And, my parents and my mom would share with us a lot of stories of how we were always leaning on our community, leaning on our family, leaning on ourselves in difficult times, trying to solve bigger problems. And so that was very much ingrained directly into my upbringing.
Yeah.
And by extension, when I went into business, I always looked for ways to increase the amount of people who were going to benefit from something, because I felt that was the way to get the maximum value, get the best return on investment, to have the most participation. And you see that like in most of the models that we see today, where you have an organization like Meta who I think is trying to do that, but maybe has a different has some different perspectives now that are not as community based. But their intent when they started was to build community.
Yeah.
And so we do that in everything we do, but we sometimes have to push our customers to extend that thinking, because they are a little bit insular in their approach.
I love this perspective. It's truly like when I think about a Canadian, like really Canadian kind of perspective to, we are a very entrepreneurial culture of people. But thinking about it from a community perspective and how that has evolved in your business and in your thinking, I think is really cool, and I think really important. You talking a lot, and all throughout this, you're talking a lot about kind of trust, and I'm really just picking up a lot of, like, you're a technologist, but I'm just picking up so much human element to what you're talking about. Is there a particular project or a moment when you realize that, technology integration, adoption systems, whatever it is really is not really about the tech, but is actually about people trusting the tools and the technologies and the systems that are being able to support them?
Yeah, that's been a continuum. One of the things when we started some of the projects, I would say in the early mid 2000s, we were building solutions like the Parks Reservation System
Yeah.
for the province of Manitoba, the integrated health record for the province of Manitoba, and the users were very much concerned about the information and that question of trust a little bit.
Yeah.
So they would rely on the paper version of something and would try to double up the process because they weren't sure, right? Like, maybe it's going to break, and maybe it's not, I don't know, we're going to lose this stuff, and so that was the first sort of time where I saw that there was some hesitancy to the belief that you could trust, there's no more paper version of this. It just lives here, right? And you just got to believe that it's there.
I sometimes wonder if I actually still trust that. But keep going.
And so what happened as it evolved is now people have a different trust problem. And I think the trust problem is, well, where is it stored and who has access to it? Who can see it? Right. So this whole idea of the American Patriot Act, which said, hey, you know what, can't have your data in the US anymore because somebody could, have to relinquish it to someone. And so the trust moved from like, I think the system will, magically erase my data because, I don't know, something will go wrong and what I put in is gone. So I need a paper copy to go back to, well, now I 100% believe that it's always going to be there, but maybe somebody else who's not supposed to see it is going to see it.
Yeah.
Or maybe somebody's going to have access, right? And that leads into the conversation of the Indigenous, Digital Act, right, around Data Sovereignty Act. And it's again, okay, well, do we really know where our data is, and do we know who has access to it, and what are the controls we have to make sure that we keep that? So the data, I guess the trust issues, I think, moved to a different trust issue.
Yeah.
Right. But people still have that challenge. I think they're still challenged with, can a company see everything that's on my phone? Can they listen in? Like people tell me all the time, oh, my phone's listening all the time. And I said, why do you say that? Well, because we talked about this trip and now I got ads for this trip. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm sure we can well, apparently no. And I'm going to stick to that answer for now. But I've seen a lot of conspiracy theorists and ideas of people who can demonstrate that it's very possible to have things listen and do all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that is more of a personal approach. And for me, I'm like, you know what? So be it, right? If you want to listen in on my conversations, like I lead a pretty boring life, so we'll leave it at that.
Okay, so let's pivot here because I like where this is going in terms of data and data sovereignty. And we were having a conversation. We've had many conversations about what that means for Indigenous communities. So you mentioned some legislation. Can you just unpack that a little bit for us, help us understand, root us in the conversation of what we're actually talking about here when we're talking about data sovereignty and specifically for Indigenous communities?
Yeah, so the topic of data sovereignty for Indigenous communities is fairly new to me, and it's not new, I think, to everyone. But in the community, it has been a topic, a conversation that's been pretty hot topic. And the idea is that I think there's a different approach to ownership in the Indigenous community. There was never a thought that as the Europeans had of you own this and I own that, and it was everyone's to share, like the earth, like the resources, everything. And that's why there wasn't delineations of land, and there was really you had your sort of area that you would travel and so on, but there wasn't this sense of ownership. Yeah. And when you start looking at, okay, well, what is happening now with the elements of language, the elements of cultures, music, medicine, etc., that were, I guess, created by the Indigenous people. There was no concept that they owned that, and so I think it's really important to respect the fact that if someone is going to benefit materially or financially from some of that information, it's not like it's open use information. It's not, something that basically doesn't need to be, I guess, recognized as owned by someone. And so the idea of Indigenous data sovereignty is to say, do we have a way to understand what we're storing? What is our internal knowledge? What is things that we want to protect? Do we have control over it? Do we is it on premise? Do we really have authority to understand who has the rights to see this information? And so that's kind of what the idea of putting that in place is to say that we have stories, we have language, we have all kinds of pieces that are data around our communities, our organizations, our families, and we should have a lot more control over who has access to that, who is benefiting from using that information to build medication, to do all kinds of things, and how do we give them approval for that?
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges is that when you do this in technology, you are going away from what the model of technology is today, which is cloud, and you're looking at, well, do I now control the actual physical equipment, the server that is storing this information? And where is it stored? Is it on our land, our treaty land? Is it, in a cloud server somewhere on Microsoft Azure's platform, which could be, in a state in the US? And that's the part that I think we're struggling with right now, saying, does that mean we now have to start building data centers, in community?
Let me ask it kind of in a really poignant way, because I think it's where you're going to. So a lot of the conversation that we've had over the last number of years seems to be about access to the digital technology. So we talk about broadband, right? And we talk about, ensuring that there's access to things like the internet and digital tools, et cetera. Well, what you're talking about is ownership, is truly like agency of the information that's actually moving through and from Indigenous peoples and communities. And just why does the distinction of kind of the kind of access versus agency matter?
So I think for me, the access part has always been something that's been a challenge just because of the geographical nature of where these communities are. And we haven't been able to use a traditional approach of return on investment to be able to, solve those problems. So if you have a community of 700 people in a fly-in area in northern Manitoba, the return on investment of installing fiber connection line to that community or setting up, pre the Starlink world, a massive satellite system didn't make financial sense. People were struggling with that. And so without access, without connectivity, that whole community is somewhat an island. And they are not getting the benefits of social communication, right? Sharing of knowledge, sharing of ideas, sharing of being able to use that for commerce, being able to use that to share, ideology, all that kind of stuff. And so for me, that part still has to be addressed. We still have to realize that is something that we have to do outside the ROI model, right? That then leads to the agency of, okay, well, now how does that community who has now access have some kind of control or agency over the information that they have that's theirs, right? So how many members in their communities, how many of them speak whichever language, maybe some of the traditions they have around hunting, around all kinds of things. And so I think they are quite separate.
Yeah.
One is super foundational.
Yeah.
Right. I believe that the agency that they have is already in the way that they pass down their traditions, right? Because it's done through ceremonies, it's done through song, and that is very, very personal, right? And it's done in a very close context.
Mm-hmm.
It's when that gets filmed and propagated through the world without their knowledge,
right?
Without then you get into a space where okay,
and commercial benefit is shared.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
When you say Starlink, you're of course referring to the Elon Musk super dome of
right. Yes, of satellites that are floating in space.
Right. So okay, let's pivot onto this one. Let's broaden the conversation a little bit, and considering sort of our neighbors to the south right now are making some pretty decent headway in the AI field, I understand. Mm-hmm. So when we think about data sovereignty for Canadians, for Canadian companies, and kind of how our governments or policies should be put in place to protect Canadians, same issues. Like, can we think about this kind of as a national conversation around data sovereignty and kind of what we should be thinking about?
It's a difficult conversation, I guess, for me, because where the data resides is a function of who is able to deliver the most cost-effective way of managing the data storage,
mm-hmm.
right? And so in Manitoba and Winnipeg, we had an investment from Bell, and they built a data center. And this was, 15 years ago or something like that when they purchased MTS. And for the longest time, there was nobody in there, really.
Yeah.
It was really underutilized. And so the question was, why? Well, as a technologist, as a user of a data center, I compared their offering with an AWS, an Amazon AWS platform, or something like a global giant that had really put in some massive investments in that space, and said, I can give you a very limited slice of processing power and storage at this cost. And I go, wow, okay, that fits my business model, and that improves our margin. So obviously, that's where I'm going to go. Now, for me to take my own equipment and to put it into data center, yes, I will have complete agency on that equipment. But the problem is that it's dramatically more expensive to manage. So when you expand this to the Canadian data sovereignty conversation, right, how are we going to be able to produce an offering unless it's supported by those major companies who already have these massive investments, that is going to allow us to have this delineation of geographical segmentation and still be cost effective and still be able to support the entrepreneurs who want to launch, like Skip the Dishes in Winnipeg, like the Shopify's from Ottawa, right? Like if Shopify said, well, I have to put everything on Canadian soil for all my Canadian customers, and right now that's 300% more expensive.
Yeah.
How do you compete nationally, globally?
So, yes, this kind of...
So I don't want to be a naysayer, but I'm just saying.
No, well, I don't think it's a naysayer, but I think it's a realistic conversation, and we've been having it, right? So we've been talking a lot about Canada's next AI strategy. The federal government, through Innovation, Social Economic Development, released recently a consultation, a broad consultation. They're looking at kind of building this piece. And, I think about a lot the kind of research-centric roots that a lot of our budgets and investments have given, and I think for good reason, right? But to your point, are we realistically chasing having the biggest, compute system or kind of data center? Like, is that really what we're going for? Or do we need to have a conversation a little bit more about the national infrastructure that can be built to, as you say, allow our small businesses to have access at a cost that's not prohibitive, but still keeps our important commercialization assets like our intellectual property and innovations here at home. So I think we at Magnet have been kind of thinking like short forming this as like an AI grid, right? Like you built a power grid, you built a phone kind of system, you built a railway system. Like there needs to be some kind of a power grid so that every Canadian can benefit from these kinds of tools in a way that is not just bleeding our assets to other countries. And so what do you think from your perspective it would actually take to build something like that? And is that even what, like, are we right? Is that what we should be aiming for?
I guess my challenge is that right now you have companies like OpenAI, like Claude from Anthropic, Gemini, who are constantly, investing in building a platform that is always holding the user in their space as much as possible.
Right.
And so if you look at now your usage of AI, if we're going to just focus on that for a second, you'll notice that what you're trying to do most of the time is to inject the piece of information that's going to be beneficial to evaluate into that tool, right? So you've taken a meeting summary from, let's say, one of the platforms that uses a recording tool, a note taker. You export it and you import it into OpenAI, for example, or into Claude or something like that. And what you're doing is you're constantly bringing those tools into those data pieces into those tools. So if I look at what we have to do as a Canadian, user base, or I guess country, how are we going to deal with that? What does that really mean to build, something that's sovereign for Canadians when in the space of AI? Like the platform is what people are wanting. They want that feature, those tools. And I mean, if I expose everything that's in my email, right, to these tools, well, my email's probably also stored in some cloud server in the US, right? If I'm using Microsoft 365. And so I just don't know how to unbundle all of these things.
You don't have the solution immediately? You
right
can't
now I
hand
don't
it
know, but give me, a couple hours maybe. But you know what I mean? So I think that's, I have some concerns about the conversation, and maybe I'm completely like clueless on the conversation, right? Maybe
I'm sure you're not.
Maybe. I mean, I can't be. It's just there's such a tight binding, right, of the tool, the large models, and your data. Now, there's companies like DeepSeek who have something in Lambda that you can install in your own environment, in your own space. But I don't know that they're as performant, or they have the same cadence of improvements, right? Because you got to do it yourself. You got to keep building on yourself.
Right. So so we don't have the solution, unfortunately.
No.
I'm sure the federal government will be very disappointed that
I know.
this is not produced what they're looking for.
Exactly.
Maybe you can talk to me, what are the elements, right? Like, I think it's like, okay, we need to have, broadband, we need to have some kind of a data sovereignty strategy, we need to have training. Like, what do you see as the elements that are required in a national strategy?
What was interesting is that we had been the leaders in machine learning and AI, 15 years ago in Canada, in terms of the amount of talent that we produce, the leaders, the grandfathers, the godfathers of this technology, and our hesitancy to commercialize is, I think, what has caused us to have a misstep. And we have not been able to. We're aggressive at learning things and researching things, but I don't think we do a good enough job at going to market aggressively with things, right? To monetizing things, productizing things, right? And so there was a book that somebody shared with me that was all of the inventions that were done in Canada, and I was shocked. Like, I'm going through this book going, this is ridiculous. But guess where most of the value creation was done? There's a lot of American companies or global companies, right, who have taken this information, this knowledge, this research, and modernized it. So what do we need to do better? And Toby Lutz from Shopify was the biggest advocate for us to be more aggressive, to have this confidence in ourselves that we can grow, we can be successful. And he wasn't even from Canada, right? He immigrated, I think, from Germany. And I was always shocked. I said, why are people from the outside, more, almost bigger cheerleaders of Canada than people who grew up and live here all their lives, right? And I think it's one of the things we have to really figure out is how do we get this mindset of, risk is okay, failure is going to happen, and what do we need to do to build some competitiveness in the world, is we have to lean on the natural resources that we have. We have cost-effective electricity in certain provinces. We have a climate, that's great for certain kinds of data infrastructure. We have really well-educated people. And so I think we can definitely take some of those fundamental basis things and say, how do we build a strategy where we are going to be seen as a country that welcomes these kinds of investments, and that is willing to be hyper supportive of doing that. But I don't know that I think it's too late to compete in certain other parts of that conversation.
It's interesting because you bring up this concept of kind of our national cheerleading squad, for lack of a better word. And I actually had a conversation with another guest on the show all about that.
Right.
And you bring up entrepreneurial mindset. We're having another conversation today with two young entrepreneurs that will be kind of having that perspective. Okay, so there's a lot in terms of maybe our natural resources, in terms of land, geography, climate, weather, talent, research. Obviously, we know we have a very highly educated population, and so there's probably some things that we can do there in terms of talent. But are you saying that the goal of kind of creating our own mega compute AI infrastructures and tools, like having the biggest power, is probably not the thing that we should be chasing or trying to kind of out commercialize the US?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess my challenge with that is that we are coming at it a little late.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reason, and this is, not at all validated by myself, but I saw that, for example, Amazon laying off 30,000 people. What was that driving? Was it really that they had built so much AI, fluency and capabilities that they had all these redundant employees? Or was it that their actual need for compute, for chips, for data centers was so high that they needed to find a way to cost that, right? To say, well, if we take all this salary and we apply it to buying more chips and, getting more data centers, I think we have a chance of possibly not meeting the current demand, but getting close to, keeping up with the demand. And that's what I'm really seeing. So I'm saying, well, how are we going to get that kind of attraction of capital? To get, all of this really hard costs that have to be spent for data, right? For compute. I don't know. That's
Okay, so let's flip it to maybe something you do know in terms of how you're feeling about the future of Canada, whether it's our AI strategy, our entrepreneurs, our opportunity to be innovative, to be Canadian in this way. What really excites you about the future, and specifically as we're talking about the future of work here?
So exciting can be also scary, right?
Yeah, of course.
One of my concerns is our risk averseness and our hesitancy in this particular environment, because the pace is so quick, the pace of change is so rapid, is going to put us further and further behind in the world and in the competitive space of the world. And so my excitement is that we're having more conversations around it.
Yes.
I'm hearing a lot of great things about, yes, we have to act now. Yes, we have to do things. Yes, we're behind you. My challenge is I really hope to see that people will act on that and that we will actually make, some I don't know, changes around our approach to, investments in risk taking and that kind of stuff. And I work with lots of organizations. I work with, large governments. I work with small businesses who are, really the key drivers of a lot of the things that we buy and use every single day. I work with nonprofits, and they all have a different level of maturity and tolerance for change. And some of them are not very comfortable with the rate at which the change is happening.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that if that happens at a macro level in Canada, we could be left behind. And I'm concerned about that. So that's the excitement part, which I know you're looking for a positive view on that.
No, I think, listen, it's exactly right. The more that there's a certain colleague I was actually talking to in Manitoba who said, we have to stop admiring the problem, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that you're absolutely right. The more light, the more awareness, the more every Canadian starts to really think about what we're building, what we're doing with our invention, how we're commercializing it, how we're seeing ourselves as having agency and being a part of the future that we're building together. I think that is a very powerfully exciting thing. Yeah. So I want to thank you for that.
No, absolutely.
So Christian, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It was amazing to chat with you.
No, I always enjoy our conversations.